You mentioned that you have a baby girl who's a month old and she seems to only want to eat for 2 to 3 minutes, but this is happening every hour. And my suspicion is that she's not getting enough to eat during those 2 to 3 minutes, and so she's wanting to eat more frequently. Typically at 4 weeks of age, a baby's eating like 2 to 3 ounces every 2 to 3 hours. And then around 4 to 6 weeks, a baby may start to eat 3 to 4 ounces every 3 to 4 hours. Sometimes it's normal for a baby to want to eat every hour if they're going through a growth spurt, and these are typical at 7 to 10 days of life, 2 to 3 weeks of life, and again at like 3 to 4 weeks of life, and so on. So it's important to feed a baby every hour when they're going through these growth spurts because they need the nourishment to grow, and it stimulates your body, if you're a nursing mother, to make more milk for the baby. And that's how you go from making 2 to 3 ounces every 2 to 3 hours to making like 6 to 8 ounces every 3 to 5-ish hours once the baby's 6 months old or so. It's important to make sure that the baby gets what they need during each feeding that happens every 2 to 3 hours, sometimes every hour during a growth spurt. A good feeding for a newborn is typically considered 10 to 15 minutes of rhythmic sucking on one side, and then 10 to 15 minutes of rhythmic sucking on the other side. But keep in mind that it might take 45 minutes to accomplish all of this because babies get drowsy, they're comforted while nursing, and they fall asleep. And so sometimes you have to be a little proactive in keeping them awake while they're nursing so that they can finish the feeding. A baby may fall asleep after a few minutes, but you got to wake them back up. And you can do this by gently rubbing your baby's foot or their back. And if this doesn't wake them up and stimulate them to continue sucking, then you can just gently break the seal and change your baby's diaper and then relatch them and see if they're awake enough to rhythmically suck. If this doesn't work, if all else fails, then you can just put your baby down on a blanket for a moment and take a step back, and I can guarantee that this will wake them up and they'll cry, and then you can pick them up and resume the feeding. Also keep in mind that a baby needs to usually suck for 30 to 60 seconds at least at the beginning of a feeding before you have your first letdown. And you may have multiple letdowns during a feeding if your baby's able to suck long enough, but if your baby's only nursing for 2 to 3 minutes, they're missing out on a lot of good nutrition and on a lot of volume. You may have heard of the terms foremilk and hindmilk. You don't actually make 2 different kinds of milk during a nursing session, but the fat content of the milk gradually changes during a feeding. At the beginning of a feeding, typically the fat content of the milk is lower than what it is at the end of a nursing session. And so a baby gets a lot of good fat if they're able to rhythmically suck for a good 10 to 15 minutes and totally empty the breast. Think of it like a faucet. You turn a faucet on and it's cold in the beginning, but it will gradually warm up and become hot. And this is just like the fat content of the baby's milk. There's not like a switch or a point when it turns over from foremilk to hindmilk. It just gradually happens as the baby nurses. And this is, again, why you need to let your baby nurse rhythmically for 10 to 15 minutes on both sides so that both sides are stimulated and your baby is able to get that good, nutritious milk. You also mentioned that your baby has a tongue tie, and in some instances this can affect a newborn's ability to nurse well. And so I suggest talking with your pediatrician about it, and they can determine if intervention is warranted for that issue. And also talk with a lactation specialist who can watch you nurse and see if any adjustments need to be made in order for breastfeeding to be successful for you and your baby. Good luck with everything, and if you have more questions in the future for me, feel free to ask them on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Intermountain Moms, and recommend us to your friends and family too.